for other experts who are testifying in cases such as this one.
Okay, and what's your educational background?
My technical background goes back to probably the earliest workshop on photogrammetry and visual science was back in the 90s with Dr. Arthur Ginsberg. I then also was an instructor at an accredited technical college, and then later became the chairman of the multimedia department, where I taught digital video, computer animation, and also hired and fired instructors.
Okay, and how long have you worked in this particular field, sir?
Well, almost 30 years. I have consulted for a number of the hardware and software companies that provide equipment and software used by law enforcement and technical experts. I have also trained both law enforcement and forensic technicians and engineers in areas of photogrammetry, drone mapping, and also digital video analysis.
Okay. Do you have any special training or instruction with regards to these fields?
Well, we have. I've helped develop some software tools for a couple developers in which we are currently integrating laser scanning and other metrology for the purpose of analyzing crime scenes and disaster scenes. I have consulted as a trainer and as a curriculum advisor for a couple companies that produce training for law enforcement and for engineers. I've written a number of articles and done presentations, as well as a couple chapters in some forensic publications and textbooks.
So you mentioned photogrammetry. Can you describe and explain what that is for the members of our jury?
Photogrammetry is a big word that really means deriving accurate measurement or accurate data from photographs or from video or film. And it operates on the theory that when we use a camera, the lens is collecting information on very basic laws of physics, and we can reverse engineer what the lens sees to tell what the camera was observing. So the best example would be if I have 3 photographs of an object taken from 3 different locations, we can use computer software to calculate where that object is in 3-dimensional space. So in this particular case, we were asked to look at velocity of the vehicles, and we used a number of tools to provide that information to you.
And you also mentioned digital video analysis. What does that entail?
Well, back in the 80s, when digital video first became available generally, it changed a lot of the way we operate in forensics, because digital video operates at a very specific definable frame rate. In this case, we have body cameras worn by the officers. Those cameras are operating at 29.97 of a second, or frames a second. So just less than a 30th of a second, there's a new image taken by the body camera. So digital video allows us to have a very specific time record of events recorded. If the camera is good, which it was in this case, then it's a matter of just collecting the distance accurately. And from your old junior high science class, you may remember that if you have time and if you have distance, you can derive speed or velocity.
What is a 3D model, and why is that helpful?
Say that one more time.
3D CAD model?
Okay. 3D CAD. CAD just stands for computer-aided design. But also, since the 80s, everyone from engineers to architects to surveyors have begun working with computer modeling programs, and that was the same thing for me. I became very interested in that back at the advent in the 80s. And this is a way to create scene accurately in a virtual model. model of the scene where the events took place. That allows us to make measurements that are accurate. It allows us to recreate what the officers saw. It allows us to recreate what opposed to having to put on your training. I have a chapter in a railroad forensic textbook. I have a number of white papers where I've written for engineers and for forensic technicians, and I also then present regularly at conferences and at training seminars.
Are you a member of any professional organizations within these fields of expertise? Yes,
I'm a member of the IAFSM, and that stands for International Association of Forensic and Security Metrologists, and that's another big word that I don't know who named it, but what it basically means is anybody interested in deriving measurements and data from crime scenes or disaster scenes will be benefited from this organization. We perform workshops, we certify people in some areas, and we have been, we have a conference every year. In fact, it's coming up this year, where we are looking at laser scanning and particular elements of crime scene analysis.
Now, I've seen this case, you were asked to do some work for the prosecution, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, on prior cases, let me just ask you, have you testified in court before as an expert witness in these fields?
I have. I don't testify as often as a lot of expert witnesses because we usually are providing data that's used by the guys who are the number crunchers or the opinion experts. We think of ourselves more like a surveyor, where we are collecting accurate information, and whomever hires us, data is data, and we use the same techniques, and we try to collect and provide data that can then be used by the people who can derive opinions and testimony, such as this case. We have an accident reconstructionist who's an engineer who understands the way those numbers are calculated and applied.
Okay, so you're asked to work for the prosecution in this case, but on prior occasions, have you worked on the defense side as well?
Yeah, we have almost a 50-50 mix working for prosecution versus defense. We also do a lot of cases on the civil side where airplane crashes or trucking disasters, and we almost always work 50-50 there. And it's just, you know, we are professionals. We'll work for whoever retains us, and we like to hold ourselves out as being agnostic. If you hire us, we'll give you the accurate data, and no matter who hires us, we try to apply that standard.
Now, obviously, you expect to be paid for your work, is that correct?
That's correct.
What is your rate?
My rate is $350 an hour, and then for courtroom testimony, it's $450 an hour.
So if you can give the jury a ballpark of how much you expect to be paid in total on this case.
You know, I think it's it was very tedious because of the work we had to do, which I presume we'll get into, but it's up at $16,000 or $17,000 at this point.
Now, with regard to what you were asked to do in this particular case, describe for the jury what that was.
When we were approached, the question was put to us was, is it possible to accurately determine the velocity of the vehicles that were moving in this case? And to do that, as a forensic technician, you approach it from a number of different means. Sometimes you have a black box in the car that will show you the velocity. We didn't have that, or if it existed, it either was not valid or certainly wasn't provided to me. So what I was provided were 5 body cameras that were taken at the scene when the events were taking place. I was also given a laser point cloud that was produced by the Texas Rangers. And interestingly, the organization I mentioned that I'm part of is actually one of the main officers is a Texas Ranger, so I have had some opportunity to learn about them and the equipment they use. And they use a very good system produced by a company called Leica Technology, and they went out to the scene a couple weeks after it happened and they ran the laser scanner. And what this is a device that sits on a tripod, and it shoots a laser beam at 360 degrees millions of times, and every time that laser strikes an object, it reports back to the software where that object was. So when you are finished, you have a complete 360 degree replication of everything the laser saw. Now, you can't see behind something, but everything that you can see, you can measure, and if you want to get the information behind an object, say behind a fence or behind a car, you just move the laser scanner over there and you run it again. You combine all of these together, and you can actually, now that we have the software that we use, you can put on your Oculus goggles and you can actually stand and look as though you were in the scene. And it's really a useful tool that's kind of space age or technical, where you can actually measure objects and you can view objects and see what's available to be seen within this virtual reality. So in this particular case, the Texas Rangers produced a laser scan, and my first job is to make sure that that is accurate, because believe it or not, sometimes people don't operate equipment appropriately, and sometimes the results aren't accurate. So I had all of the scene photographs, I had the body cameras, and I came to Dallas and I did my own laser scanning session, and I also flew a photogrammetric drone, which is a calibrated drone camera that acquires photogrammetric information so that we could have the entire apartment complex created. Once we, I'm sorry?
Stop 1 second.
Yes.
Just so the jury is clear, what exactly did I ask you to do in this case? And we'll get into
yes.
what you did later.
I was asked to find accurately what the velocity of the vehicles were and where the officers were throughout the sequence. And to get there, you have to acquire all of this information. You could look at it and say, well, I think that's 2 miles an hour, but obviously that's as good as the opinion that I have, and we had to rely on a very sophisticated scientific analysis to figure out what the data was that could be the basis for determining that velocity.
And so with regards to the information that you provided, you already mentioned the 5 body-worn cameras, is that correct?
That's correct.
You had some crime scene photographs?
We had the crime scene photographs, and these were important because they show both of the principal vehicles, the patrol car and the Dodge Journey. They show them where they came to rest. And the officers took a spray can and marked the tires for those vehicles, and they also marked a couple other objects. They marked where the door of the patrol car was open. They also marked the tires for a Chevrolet Astro van that is there at the scene. So those paint marks actually show up in the laser scan. So now we can really precisely, to a fraction of an inch, tell you where these vehicles came to rest.
Okay, you also mentioned the Texas Rangers doing a 3D scan of the scene with the Leica, is that correct?
That's correct.
You had mentioned a point cloud. Can you describe for the members of the jury, what is a point cloud?
Yeah, as I explained, it was every point that laser touched. If we set the laser scanner in this courtroom and I ran it, we would turn on the computer screen, and you all would be visible in there, except if you moved. If you moved your head, you might have 2 heads while the scanner is moving around. But for objects that are fixed, the jury rail, the desks, the lights, anything that is not moving is accurately determined. So in this case, of course, we make sure nothing is moving to block the scanner. In this case, we have a 3-dimensional representation of the fence, the marks of the tires on the ground, where the carport is. Every object that is visible as being unmoved in those scene photographs is very precisely located now within the point cloud.
What other information was provided to you for your analysis in this case?
We were given the crime reports. There's some incident reports with diagrams that were drawn by the police department. We had the affidavits of the officers. We were also given, let me think if there's anything else in our list. I mentioned the crime scene photographs and the body cam videos. I think that was what we were provided.
Okay, and you had also started to describe some new information that you gathered. You had mentioned going to the scene in the independently and doing a 3D scan of the scene. Is that correct?
That's correct, and we also went to where the Dodge Journey vehicle is impounded, and we did our own laser scan of it, because as you will find out, it becomes very important to know the length of that vehicle and the diameter of its tires in order to derive the velocity it was moving.
Okay, any other new data? Did you actually go to the scene with one of the body-worn cameras in this case?
Yes, we wanted to know where the officers were, and the best way to do that is to determine what the camera is seeing. So I was graciously provided a body camera of the same model used by the officers. We took it to the scene, shot footage with it, and then ran the laser scanner. So now we not only have a laser scan of the scene, but we also have the same scene seen through the body camera, so that we can very precisely determine what the body camera is seeing. Then finally, we did a series of tests with the body camera using a spatial grid, so that we could then run it through a software program to see if the lens has any distortion or any defects. If it does, we can correct for that. And once we were done in this case, we found that these are very, very good cameras with a very appropriate and high-resolution optical system.
So with the data that was provided to you, in addition to the new data that you gathered, what exactly did you do with that information?
Well, we started out, and again, the objective here is to decide how fast are these objects moving that we see in the video. Second objective is, where are the people who are taking these views with their body cameras located? So we started with the three-dimensional scene, and we converted that to the CAD model, and that's a accurate computer model that lets us, simply, it's like being a 12-year-old kid with cars, and you can play with them in the computer. But in this case, it's a very precise, accurate model of what the crime scene was. We then looked at the digital video itself. So there's a couple processes, and I'm going to explain them to you. The first is, we can see in multiple cameras the wheels turning on the Dodge Journey. And the Dodge Journey wheels have spokes. You can see, I believe it's six or eight cavities. So you can see the wheel turn very clearly when the body camera is not shaking. Back in your physics class, if you're like me, you can barely remember, but pi is the function that if you know the diameter of a wheel, you can figure out the circumference or the tread. So in this case, we can see the wheel turning, we can count and track that rotation. Now all we have to know is the precise diameter of that tire, and we can tell you how fast that tire is moving. So we did that on several segments, and we looked at the tire diameter both on the laser scan and on the manufacturer's specifications, and we found out that this tire is a very specific diameter, which I don't have committed to memory, but Mr. Partain can certainly talk about it. And we were able to calculate speed of this vehicle using rotational velocity, and we determined in several points that essentially this vehicle is moving at walking speed. We also looked at that same question and said, let's look at it another way. And we took all the body cameras and we measured photogrammetrically where the car was when it's against the fence, where it is at the next interval, and we used the CAD model to create a three-dimensional analysis of the motion of both the patrol car and the Dodge, and we were able to calculate velocity completely separate from the rotational velocity. The bottom line was, it came out consistently. Once again, we're looking at speeds of 2.5, 3 miles an hour for the motion of this vehicle. Finally, then, we looked at the video itself and stabilized it and put the fence in the background so that we can see the car moving across the fence. We know exactly what the dimensions of this fence are because we have the laser scan, We also know the dimensions of the Dodge Journey because we have it scanned. So now we can study at every 30th of a second where that car is moving, and we can then derive the velocity that way. So the reason it's so expensive is this is a tedious process, but we looked at it from 3 different approaches, and we came up with the consistent velocities in this case.
Now, with regard to the demonstratives that you put together for this jury to see today, how many of those was it?
We produced 3 different short clips that we felt would be helpful to explain the information that we derived in the case.
Mr. Johnson, I'm going to show you what's been already admitted for record purposes at this point. States that number 139, 140, and 141. Can you tell me whether or not you recognize those?
I do.
Okay, and are these the demonstratives that you put together?
Yes, and we confirmed that and viewed each of them. Those are the demonstrative exhibits we produced.
Okay, just for the record, 139 is rotational average velocity with timer.
Correct.
140 is sync with camera views.
Correct.
And 141 is velocity positions timed to shots.
Correct.
And you had an opportunity to view these videos prior to your testimony today.
I have.
Do they fairly and accurately represent the demonstrations that you put together
They do.
during your analysis?
Yes.
And would they be helpful to the jury to understand your testimony today as it pertains to the position of the officers as well as to the velocity of the victim's vehicle?
I do believe it would be helpful.
It's time the state offers 139, 140, 151 all persons 10 to come.
It's admitted. You may publish.
So let's start with state exhibit number 139, rotational average velocity with timer. And before we show it to the members of the jury, if you can just kind of describe what are they looking at on this particular exhibit?
Well, with this particular video, you're going to see, and I believe this is at slow motion so that it's easier to detect. You're going to see the body cameras, there'll be 3 of them, from 3 different officers, and they've been synchronized so that as the video is playing and we're seeing the same view from 3 different cameras. There's a timer so that you can see the time counting down to when the first shot is first fired. And at intervals, you'll see us track the rotation of a wheel, and then a value of average velocity will flash on the screen. So that's the average velocity the vehicle is going at that interval. So you can play this and look at the time, and you can see the views of each officer, and you can also see what the movement of the vehicle is. It is at slow motion, and so if it's played with audio, it'll sound strange, and that's because the dispatch audio is 1/4 of the speed of normal speech.
Publishing states exhibit number 139, rotational average velocity with timer.
So if you look in the upper left-hand corner, you can see that wheel being tracked, and you can see the velocity there was 2.1 mile per hour average. Now the front wheel comes in and it's slightly faster, 2.5 miles per hour and 2.8. So I'm sorry, this one doesn't have the countdown to the shots. That's on the other video. But that timer that you see there, that is simply an accurate time code. It's reading what the video frames are telling it. So every 30th of a second, the frame is updating, and we've slowed that down, so now it's 1/4 of that speed. So obviously 1 second takes 4 seconds when you play it at this speed.
You talked about it being slowed down. The audio that we hear on there sounds kind of distorted, and I think you kind of described that that's because it's been slowed down.
That's correct.
Can you describe for the members of the jury what audio are they hearing on this video?
You're hearing the actual radio traffic that is being collected on the body cameras, and when you play it at real time, of course, you'll hear the officers talking. Now it's slow motion, very low, but if you listen carefully, you can make out the words, and of course you can hear the first shot fired there because it's a very prominent spike in the audio signal.
So the audio is the officers talking, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
With the exception of then the bullets that you hear.
Okay, as well as the shots being fired at the end of the video.
That's correct.
All right. So with respect to the moment in time right before the shots, what kind of velocity are we talking about with respect to the victim's vehicle?
We're under 3 miles an hour, and I believe just short before I think it was average velocity of about 2.8 miles per hour.
So when you say average velocity, what does that mean?
Well, when I move my hand, if I'm moving it at a constant speed, say 1 foot per second, then there's no problem. It's always going at 1 foot per second. But if I accelerate it or slow it down, that velocity is changing over time. And I can move it like this, and to get a sense of what the true velocity is over an interval of time, you average its motion. And so that's what typically experts in this field do. If you look at a very momentary instant from one frame to the next, you can be deceived because there may be a slight jitter in the frame or the pixels. So we always try to work with average velocity to be more meaningful. So in this case, the velocities are in fact low, and they're within the what are the parameters of human walking speed.
So next we're going to take a look at State's Exhibit number 140, which is going to be synced with the camera views. And if you could describe what the jury's about to see on this particular exhibit.
Okay, this one, you're going to see the computer CAD model. So you're going to see the actual virtual model of the scene that we created. And on the left side of the screen, you will see 3 of the body cameras in sync with what you're seeing. But the main part of the screen is going to be looking straight down on the computer model, and you'll see a timer that counts down to when the first shot is fired, and you will see the velocity being derived instantaneously as the vehicle is moving. So as we're looking down, you'll notice the velocity of the Dodge is in the upper center of the screen. Now it's just started backing up, and it strikes the patrol car, and it's going to go forward into the fence. Now it's going to back up the sequence, and you'll see that the first shot is now 4 seconds away, 2 seconds. So the car stops after the first shot are fired, and then it rolls back again. And you can track the velocity throughout the motion by just looking at that scene.
This demonstrative also contains the position of the officers based upon your analysis of their body cams, correct?
Yes, as you've heard testimony in this case, the officers were in different locations, and you can follow their motion over the time and in relation to when the first shots are fired.
So we'll watch State's Exhibit 140 again.
And we've removed the carport to make it more obvious and easy to see where everybody is. But
I didn't mean to cut you off.
it's gone, it's fine.
Okay. So at this time, we're going to focus on the officers' positions, okay?
Okay.
Back up. Have you ever ran the like security with their uniform and armed? Don't move!
So based on your analysis of all the body-worn camera evidence in this case, as well as the demonstrative that you put together for the jury today, fair to say that the officers who were behind the vehicle initially were no longer there at the time the shots were fired?
You know, based on the photogrammetric analysis, this is where the officers were. Yeah, to my eye, they definitely are not behind the car when it moves, but I'm not expressing an opinion on what that means. That is where they were, and that's our purpose, is to show you accurately where everybody is at throughout the duration of this sequence.
So on this particular demonstrative, what velocity are we talking about for the Dodge journey right before the shots were fired?
Well, again, this is computing the velocity on a moment-by-moment basis. So it shows here 2.4 miles per hour. That's at that instant. Over time, though, as you watch it, it's slightly above, slightly below, but the bottom line, and what I try to tell people to think about it meaningfully, human walking speed is considered 3.1 mile per hour. Is what, if you put somebody in a room and you just say walk, that's the preferred walking speed as determined by biomechanicists. So if walking speed is about 3 miles an hour, the movement of the vehicle in this case is at or below that throughout the sequences we're looking at here.
And finally, we'll look at exhibit number 141. This one is velocity, positions, time, shots. What are we going to see in this exhibit?
Well, this sequence opens up with a view obliquely of the three-dimensional model. When we first began working on this, we weren't sure what was going to be relevant, so we actually modeled out the full apartment complex. And you'll see, when this one opens up, you'll see a view so you can see the orientation of the whole model. And then the camera is going to go up to the overhead view, the same overhead view we're looking at here, and we're going to see the same sequence with velocity in relation to the computer model. So here's the full three-dimensional model that we built. Now we're going to dissolve away the carport, and we can now see the same motion of the officers. But this one gives you a little bit better orientation of where everything was.
Back up. Have you ever ran the security uniform in orange? Don't move!
What software did you use to create these demonstratives?
We use several tools, but the primary computer CAD tool was made by a company called Autodesk, and it's called 3D Studio Max. It's used commonly by everyone from the National Transportation Safety Association to the major law enforcement agencies and engineering firms. We also used a series of video calibration tools to calibrate the video and look at the body cameras, and we used a number of the Adobe software packages you may be familiar with, Adobe After Effects, Adobe Photoshop, and we used a product called Input Ace, which is a particular video analysis tool used by law enforcement and the government.
So with regards to the tools that you use, they have been used other governmental agencies as far as
Yes, these tools now are to the point we used in the association that I work with. We used to keep a record of the software and the cases that it was introduced in, because it was important to establish that these tools are accurate. Several years ago, we stopped doing that because we had hundreds of cases with these particular software tools. Both laser scanning and three-dimensional computer modeling are now not only established, they are pretty much a prerequisite, because there's no better way to accurately get reconstruction data these days.
So again, with regard to the validity of the velocities that you came up with on these demonstratives, you actually did it in different ways with regard to tracking the tire movement, is that correct?
Yes, we rotated the tire, we looked at photogrammetric positioning, and we stabilized the video and compared the movement of the car against a known background object.
And you consistently came up with the same results?
Yeah, you know, you get variations. If I measure that television monitor with two different yardsticks, I'll get a different result. Not because the yardsticks aren't accurate, but because there's always an amount of variance typically. So in this case, what we're interested in is not, can we replicate the results? Are we going to get consistent results? And in this case, we got consistent results. I have no problem expressing confidence in this data.
And you also mentioned that you had your information checked again with respect to an accident reconstructionist, making sure that these velocities were correct.
Yes, I will have to admit, I'm not the greatest with math. I can run the computer extremely well and I understand concepts, but my checkbook may not be balanced properly. And I don't have an engineering degree. I'm very knowledgeable of what I do, but when it comes to calculating or to actually establishing accident reconstruction, we almost always work with someone who uses our data and then can express those opinions, and they can answer the hard questions about why is this motion calculated at this particular way. So we provide the data, and in this case we provided the data to a qualified accident reconstructionist to confirm both the accuracy of our techniques and the accuracy of the velocity calculations that the computer created.
And who was that individual that you worked with?
That's Mark Partain. He's from Fayetteville, Arkansas, and he has agreed just this year to start consulting with us because we have found our clients often need these services, and rather than having to wait for them to engage someone, if they require it, we have someone now that we can trust and that we provide data to.
And were his conclusions consistent with your conclusions on this case?
They were.
Thank you. Pass with Sean. Cross-examination. Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Johnson, fair to say your bill is over $20,000 at this point?
I'm bad at math, as I said. I haven't calculated it, but that sounds like the case, yes.
But when you gave it to me at the beginning of the week, it was $19,650, and since you are $450 an hour to testify, you're over $20,000.
Well, I think I put on there, I estimated a 4-hour testimony, which I haven't looked at my testimony. I'd have to go back and see how much over, but if you say so, I won't dispute that.
That's a fair representation, isn't it?
Yeah, I just gave you my hours and my rate, so I didn't add up the total, or if I did, I don't have it by memory now.
And you had Mr. Partain check your math, and he would have billed for those hours separate, correct?
He bills separately from me, yes.
Did the state make you aware that you are the second group of experts they hired?
No.
Did they tell you that they had hired an expert to do speed calculations well before you?
No.
Did they tell you that that expert had the speed almost twice as much as your speeds were?
They didn't tell me that. I've since, through this trial, learned that there were some calculations that were not done appropriately.
Well, they hired somebody and had speeds twice as much as yours, didn't like that, and then engaged your services. Were you told any of that? Were you told any of that you were the second group of experts they were hiring to make these calculations?
Well, when I was hired, I was asked to perform this task. Since this time, I've learned that there was a gentleman who did kind of a back-of-the-envelope estimate, and his approach was not acceptable by the terms of velocity determination. So I didn't know that until this trial, but I can certainly see why those estimates were not accurate.
You learned it from me. You didn't learn it from the state, did you?
Well, I think I learned it from being in the courtroom.
And me, my witness, who I called.
Oh, I didn't know whose witness it was, but if you say so.
And you actually had to slow things down. Your phrase was, so it's easier to detect. You had to slow it down to the jury for it to make it easier for them, correct?
No, it slowed down to be able to see the tracking more easily, but it's not any different information.
It's not any different information, but in order for the jury to actually see what you wanted them to, you had to slow the time down, right?
Well, I didn't have to, but I thought it was helpful given that we're looking at a very short interval of time here.
And we are, for every second, you made it last 4 seconds. Is that what you said?
Well, the computer slowed it down 4 times, yes.
And you talk about walking speed. You would agree with me that the speed of this car changed several times, didn't it?
Well, it's constantly changing.
Constantly changing, and constantly could keep changing, couldn't it?
Well, it's changing within a walking speed parameter. All of these velocities, you can see yourself, are within a narrow range.
Because there was a narrow space to maneuver in, right?
I'm not following that, I'm sorry.
Well, the first time it moves, when it goes back into the squad car, they don't have a lot of room to get momentum, do they?
That's correct.
But you would agree with me they're gaining momentum as they hit the squad car.
You know, I think Mr. Partain could probably comment on that. Certainly, I don't believe the acceleration is very high. So it's not as though they slammed on the accelerator.
And then you see when the car rams the fence, when the driver rams the fence, you would agree that they're gaining momentum in as small an area as they can?
No, I mean, they could have blasted into that fence, but they went at a slow speed.
You think they weren't trying to ram down the fence?
Well, that's outside of my expertise, but I know that the velocity that we see, as you can see on the video and as you look in the velocities, they approach the fence at a slow rate.
And when they put it in reverse and back up where the officers are, you were trying to show where those officers are at that time, correct?
Well, I think the demonstrative show that, yes.
Okay, and your reason for creating that demonstrative was in order to accurately show this jury where the officers were, right?
Yes.
And in order to do that, you had to slow it down so that every second lasted 4 seconds.
No, the purpose of we don't do anything with where the officers are where we slow it down. There's only one exhibit that is slowed down, and that is simply looking at the rotation of the tire. Both of those other exhibits are at real time. So when you look at those, that is the motion of the car. And you can see it by comparing the camera, which is also on the left side of the screen. And that's at real time. That's not slowed down.
Okay, so you created one exhibit where you slow it down.
For the rotation of the tire, yes.
Every second lasts 4 seconds. You created one exhibit where you slowed time down for them, right?
For the rotation, yes.
And then you created another exhibit where you make it well lit.
Well.
It's all the same lighting in your exhibit, isn't it?
Okay, I'll give you that, yes.
It's not like it is on the body-worn cameras. It's not dark. It's not shadowy. There's not a bunch of leaves on the ground.
Well,
it's a well-lit diagram.
Yes.
And you remove the carport.
Yes.
Officer Hess didn't have the benefit of that. The carport was there. And you remove the other cars that are in the way, right?
Well, the cars under the carport are not there. Yes, those cars were there at the scene, but our purpose was to show clearly the velocity and motion and the relative positions.
And in order to do that, you had to make it well lit, remove the carport, remove the other cars, and slow it down by 4 seconds.
No, the 4 seconds is, the 4 times slow motion is only the rotation of the tires.
Mr. Johnson, you took 51 hours in preparing this case for trial, correct?
That's correct.
So you took 51 hours to create for this jury what Officer Hess had 4 to 5 seconds to calculate, didn't you?
I don't think that's fair, but if you want to phrase it that way.
Well, that's what you did, right? You took 51 hours.
No, I came to Dallas twice. I did extensive scanning. I did extensive analysis in 3 different modalities. You can't get this, particularly with low velocity cases, you can't get this level of accuracy without spending time.
And Officer Hess didn't have the benefit of that night, did he?
Just speculation. You can answer.
Officer Hess had the time that is, you can see on the demonstrative exhibits that we produced.
And you were in no way telling this jury that you can predict the future, are you?
I wish I could.
You know what I'm getting at. You were not saying whether or not the person in that car was going to accelerate out of that parking lot through officers. You can't tell the jury that, can you?
Well, I would never presume to tell the jury what somebody's going to do. I can only show you accurately what the facts were.
And in order to do that, it takes you 51 hours, 3 diagrams, removing the carport, making it well lit, removing the car, in order to accurately show this jury.
Well, I'm proud that we were able to get the work done the way we did, and I'm happy to stand by it.
Just very briefly, Mr. John, I'm going to show you a couple documents and you tell me whether or not you've seen it before.
Yes, I have.
Okay. So when the defense counsel asked you, and you made aware that there were some other calculations in this case, you were aware of that, correct?
I was aware of those documents, yes.
And I made you aware of those, correct?
Yes, you did.
Okay. And we discussed these, didn't we?
We did.
And we talked. Well, you tell me, what are your thoughts on those calculations?
Well, those calculations are not only incorrect in terms of documenting, I believe that they, in some respects, describe an acceleration that physically was impossible by this car. Now, I'm not an expert in that area, and Mr. Partain can certainly talk about it, but I know what the officer did who made these calculations, and it was completely unacceptable and inaccurate as a means to accurately reconstruct the velocities of this vehicle.
And with respect to the individual who created these calculations, you had made allusions that it was an officer. This was Detective Ernest Embry with the Dallas County Sheriff's Department. Were you aware of that?
I became aware of that, and I was aware of what he said he did to create those measurements.
Okay. Talking about using a stopwatch, is that correct?
Yes, he apparently was looking at the video. If you play this video on any of your computers, whether you use the Windows player or the QuickTime player, you can see seconds and frames, but apparently whatever tool he had to play the video only gave him a second at a time. So he's trying to calculate duration of the movement of the car by looking at a video that the counter only is reading out seconds, and he's clicking his stopwatch with his finger as he's looking at the video when the car stops and when it stops. And then for measurements, he measured the width of the panel on the fence in the background as I think about 8 feet, he said, and he tried then to estimate the time and the distance. And as I said, if you know time and distance, you know everything about the velocity of this car. This gentleman did not know the time accurately, and he did not know the distance accurately. So it's not surprising that his calculations were, I guess, twice of the velocity we calculated. Our velocities are accurate. That's what the video shows. Those calculations are not.
Thank you. Pass the witness.
So when you introduce the human error, the human part of it, what the human brain is able to do, it's not at all surprising that he was able to estimate speeds that were twice as much as yours.
Well, anybody who's trying to look at a video in the field and using a stopwatch is going to have a hard time accurately recording time or distance.
Because it's a little more like what the human brain does in real life, isn't it?
I wouldn't accept that.
And it's going to be like twice as much, isn't it?
Well, it could have been half as much. I mean, it depends on where the error was.
That's the witness.
No further questions.
May this witness be finally excused? Very good. Sir, you may stand now. Mr. Lewis, call your next witness.
They call it Mark Partain.
Sir, will we please come to the front? Before you have a seat, could you raise your right hand? You swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth. Yes, sir. All right, please have a seat. Respond to questions, Mr. Lewis. That's also Ms. Madison. To your left, you may proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Morning, sir. Could you please state your name and spell it for the court reporter?
My name is Mark Partain, M-A-R-K-P-A-R-T-A-I-N.
Mr. Partain, how are you currently employed?
I'm currently employed at a company in Fayetteville, Arkansas, EI Consultants. I've been working there about 20 years in April. And as Mr. Johnson mentioned, this year EI Consultants has encouraged me to start offering testimony on my own, and has allowed me to consult with Mr. Johnson's company, Visual Law.
And what is your educational background, Mr. Partain?
I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in engineering from the University of Arkansas. And as far as accident reconstruction specific education, there is an organization called ACTAR. They are there for people in the reconstruction community to take an exam, and you can, if you pass this exam, you've demonstrated your abilities as an accident reconstructionist, and they'll assign you a number, and then you have your ACTAR exam passed. I've taken a number of accident reconstruction related courses through the Society of Automotive Engineers and other organizations that deal with accident reconstruction as well.
Okay. And how long have you been in the field of accident reconstruction?
And I got started when I started at EI Consultants, and so that's been about 20 years ago.
Okay. Have you authored any publications or articles in your field?
I've participated in publishing a few articles related to different accident reconstruction topics, yes.
And what is accident reconstruction, just for everyone here?
Well, just as a personal definition, I would say accident reconstruction, a client will come to you and present a situation and ask a question. Then it's your job to go out into the field and collect data, whether that's inspecting, say, the accident site, looking at the accident vehicle, collecting reports generated by police departments, looking at accident scene photographs. You want to collate that data in a manner that you can do some math and analyze it and try to arrive at the answer that you were asked in the first place, and that's primarily what you do as a reconstructionist.
Now, you worked with laser scanners before?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Johnson kind of described what they do. How accurate are these laser scanners?
We purchased our first scanner a number of years ago, and at that time, Faro told us they were, Faro is the company that manufactures the scanner we use. I just thought you were going to know. But they said that the scanner is accurate to 2 millimeters over a distance of about 20 meters. And if you're not really familiar with the metric system, 20 meters is about 65 feet, and there's 25.4 millimeters in an inch. So you're looking at about 2/12 of an inch over 65 feet is how accurate they are.
Have you had experience determining velocity in forensic cases before?
Yes, sir.
On how many occasions?
Since I've started at EI Consultants, I've estimated I've worked on somewhere around 500 to 1,000 cases, the majority of which of those have been automotive-related cases and involve speed calculations of some sort.
And what were you asked to do in this case, Mr. Partain?
I was asked primarily to look at wheel rotation information Mr. Johnson obtained through looking at body cam footage from the police officers and calculate vehicle speed based off of those wheel rotations.
Okay, and tell the members of the jury about your analysis in this case and what were your results?
Okay, if it's helpful, I could, draw a diagram over there if that works, or it's okay?
Sure.
Well, you need, as Mr. Johnson said, you need two components to get speed. You need time and distance. The time portion is already covered by the police body cameras. We know that they film at 29.97 frames per second. So from that, every frame is a little bit less than 1/30th of a second. Maybe I can just explain it. So the size of the tire, you want to know the diameter of the tire. In this case, it's 29.3 inches. We know that from specifications on the tire. You can also calculate it based on the tire size. We know it's a 225/75 R16 tire. Those dimensions, the 225 is the tread width in millimeters. You've got 225 millimeters tread width. 75 is the percent of that in sidewall height, which is 6 point some odd inches, and then the wheel is about 16 inches itself. So from those numbers, sorry, I can't draw a circle. So we have a 16-inch diameter wheel there, and I just told you how we calculate the height of the sidewall here. We have two of those, the top and the bottom. So we add two sidewall heights to the wheel there, we end up with 29.3 inches diameter on that tire, which matches the scans and the specifications of the tire. And as Mr. Johnson already mentioned, you multiply that 29.3 by the constant pi, and that will tell us the distance all the way around a tire like this. So once you know the circumference of the tire, as the tire rolls along, I'm sure all of you guys have used a tape measure, and as the tape measure comes out, you know, the wheel spins, and then the tape measure comes out, so you can imagine the tire rolling along the ground, and it's working just like a tape measure for us. So we got time from the officers' body cameras, and we had the distance from the circumference of that tire, and that's how we calculated the speed of that.
Statement of office statement is 142 for demonstrative purposes.
Objections? It's admitted.
So you just described for the member of the jury how you came up with velocity based on the diameter of the tire and using timing based on the body-worn cameras. What result did you come up with?
Well, the primary focus was to look at the speed of the car from the time it left the fence as it rolled backwards towards the time that the first shots were fired. We looked at a few segments of the body camera footages. I think there were 5. We obtained speeds that ranged from about 2.4 to 3.1 miles per hour through those cameras.
And in relation to walking speed, how we compared these two?
Several articles on the internet state that preferred walking speed for people is about 3.1 miles per hour.
So this particular vehicle is in range of human walking speed?
Yes, sir, that's accurate.
And were your results consistent with the results that Mr. Johnson came up with regard to his digital video analysis?
Yes, sir, the information I got from the wheel rotations was consistent with his photogrammetric analysis that he did.
Thank you, sir. Let me ask you, Mr. Partain, how much do you charge? What's your rate?
$215 an hour.
Okay, do you know approximately how many hours you spend on this particular case?
I think it's about 25.
Okay.
It may vary there. I don't have the exact number.
Pass with me, Sean. Thank you.
Cross-examination?
Ms. Partain, it took you around 25 hours to do this calculation?
Yes, well, there were several tasks involved, but yes, ma'am.
Were you afraid during that time?
No, ma'am.
Were you under a stressful situation?
No, ma'am. Well, other than getting the right answer.
Were you worried? Yeah. Were you worried about yourself or other people?
As far as,
That somebody could get hurt if you got it wrong?
no, ma'am.
But it took you around 25 hours to gather all of this information, process it, and make sure you were right.
Well, you know, as I said, there were several tasks, and I look at it that I would rather have someone criticize me for spending too much time on analyzing a task rather than casually coming to a conclusion by not spending enough time on it. And I try to do my work as quickly as possible and be as accurate as possible in that time.
But you had the luxury of taking all the time you needed, didn't you?
Yes, ma'am.
And the amount of time it took to make sure that you get it right, it was around 25 hours.
Yes, ma'am.
Pass the witness.
Lewis?
No question, John.
And this witness be finally excused.
Okay.
Thank you all very much. Sir, you are excused from your service. You may stand down. Call your next witness, please.
State calls Jonathan Priest.
Members of the jury, why don't you take a 10-minute recess in between these witnesses? So if you would please, all rise for the jurors. Court's at recess. 10 minutes.